Welcome to the Fourth Curtain, everyone. Thank you for joining us again this week. Today, we're doing a special episode that we're calling How to Start a Game Studio. Obviously, I have thought about quite a bit, having started 4 studios. All of those have been very different. So we thought it might be cool to talk about that process, what it's like.
But also it's other topics. So the context is we did another episode that had like 6 topics in there, and like of the 6, like 4 of them were really interesting and the episode felt weird. So we shelved the episode and thought, what if we just do the topic?
One topic, one interesting topic, as opposed to 6 random things, some of which I think you're being generous that 4 of them were interesting.
I think they were.
Okay, but before we get rolling, what was your first job you ever had?
The first job I had was selling newspapers in front of the grocery store. I was 13 years old.
Oh, okay. I think I've heard this. I think you mentioned it in the Patrick Curry
It was
episode, our very first episode.
amazing. Yeah. One of the best jobs I ever had. Yeah, like people would feel sorry for you because you're like this little scrappy kid. And sometimes it'd be freezing outside and I'd be like selling.
Would you wear like shoes with holes in them? And
I put coal on my face, like
one of those
coal
felt
ash.
hats. Yeah.
So I would just look scrappy. No, but it was just neat. And then what I would do is my mom to this day will like still kind of brags about it sometimes. So I would get paid in quarters because the paper was $1.25. And I would get to keep the quarter from every sale. And if I sold the Sunday paper was like $1.75 or something, and I would get to keep 3 quarters from the Sunday paper. So you wanted to sell the Sunday paper, the Sunday special.
Where did the rest of the money go? To the newspaper company?
Yeah, they'd come by and pick up any papers you didn't sell. Sometimes you'd sell out, and that was like, and you could go home.
So, okay, as a distributor, you were getting 25 cents out of $1.25. So that's 1/5. So your distribution fee was basically 20% of a weekday newspaper.
Yeah, it was really good.
Apple charges 30% to do distribution. That's way less work than what you were doing.
Well, the dollar was stronger at that time too. What I was going to tell you is I would have like, I guess $1, and you're selling like 100 papers. But what I say is, with the quarters, I would take my mom to the movie theater. So we would go to the dollar theater, and I would buy like the snacks and stuff, and she was all happy.
Oh, yeah. That's sweet. That's sweet. Okay. Cool. I asked because we were just talking about, you were saying you were watching The Bear, and you told me, and I had never heard this story before, that you worked at a Wendy's.
A Wendy's and a Little Caesars.
And, my son, when he was in high school, worked at McDonald's, a restaurant that I don't frequent, but I think the experience for him was excellent in terms of learning responsibility and having a job, earning his own money and taking care of his own money. This is all related to starting a game studio, I think. But
it is.
Did you get some of that sense of like, when you worked, I'm guessing you were older. You must have been older working at Wendy's because they weren't going to hire a 13-year-old. Did you get a sense of responsibility?
It did, because you have a schedule. So they give you hours. Like you work Tuesday from 2:30 to, and you had to learn when to say no. Like, so there was a lot I learned there. Like you had to show up. If you didn't, you'd get fired. And I saw a lot of people get fired. And then if you showed up to work and you like complained, and yeah, there was a lot. You could see there's a lot of structure there that really helped.
Funny you mentioned those 2 things, because one of my favorite pieces of career advice I've ever seen was a simple post. Somewhere probably is on LinkedIn. I don't know, but it was like, here's 5 things that you can do. Anyone can do.
TikTok wisdom, dude. It's the best.
Is that what it is? I don't know, but it's like, show up on time.
Yeah.
Be polite, smile, and be honest. Just easy things that Simple I think probably a large percentage of the workforce never really got trained on. So good for you for having that job. So why don't we get started with our topic for today, which is how to start a game studio.
Okay, so we do have an outline that you suggested, which I think is really good. And the first one is why. So why do you want to start one? And what are good reasons to do so? What's a game studio really, right? So, but the first thing I would say is, when you start a game studio, or ask, because you're a business person, I would say. So you really understand or maybe you understood this when you started.
Understood nothing when I got started. I understood nothing.
So the question is, why start one? And I think we should also discuss uh, who is starting one. Is it a programmer? Is it an artist? Is it a
Hmm.
designer? Is it a
Yeah,
musician? Is it a
yeah.
producer? You know what I mean? Because I think that matters too. Like in my opinion.
Actually, really interesting. We just had Tim Morton on. So if you're listening to this one, it's last week's episode. And he was talking about when he left Activision. I think it was Activision. Yeah, he left Activision, started Savage Entertainment, it's an independent studio,
Mm-hmm.
and he was telling us how he didn't really think too much about the business aspect of running a
Mm-hmm.
studio. Just wanted to make games, and that's what they were there for, is to just make games. And that's usually the first question I ask somebody who asks me if they should start a game studio, which is, why? Like, why do you want to start a game studio? Because a game studio fundamentally is a business, and it's a business that makes video games. And if your dream is to make video games, yes, you could start a studio and do that. Um, but it might not be what you're hoping it is.
Yeah.
Some folks, I think, end up uh, perhaps stuck in a situation where they can't focus on what they really want to do, which is to be creative and make games. And I think your question, are you an artist? Are you a programmer? Are you a producer? I think that matters too, because that that will make a big difference in whom you surround yourself with in this new venture if you're going to start a studio. So
Yeah.
if you're thinking about starting a studio, that is the first question I would sort of ask myself, or ask yourself, is, why do I want to do this? Do I want to start a business? Do I think I have something to create at a business entity level? Do I want to get rich? Am I doing this to get rich? Am I doing this because I can't work for somebody else? It's like, I would need
Mm-hmm.
control. I'm not a good employee. I don't want to do what other people have to say. Are you willing to work, to grind? Having a
Yeah.
business in a studio is almost always a grind. And I don't mean that in a horrible way. I just mean there's nobody else is going to do it for you.
Yeah.
It's all on you.
It's funny you say that because you have to wear many hats too. It's what it sounds like. Are you willing to wear many hats? Is kind of what you're saying too, right? Like in some
Yeah.
respect, like the EA working at EA, they're a giant corporation that has a person for every like position, I guess. Where like if right, so
Yes.
like if a person like leaves the studio, there's so many other people that EA never really like suffers, I guess, when that happens. But in a startup, would
Yeah.
you say it's like a little different? Like you're committing, everyone joining is committing. Would you say that's a thing?
Yeah, at a small startup, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe I'm
I
jumping
would.
ahead. Maybe I'm jumping ahead
Well, no,
because
no,
we're
no.
on
I
the
mean, I think
why.
it's every time that I've gone from a entrepreneurial environment to a corporate environment, like going from Bungie to Microsoft, or Wide Load to Disney, or Industrial Toys to Electronic Arts, I have to take hats off. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I am so intertwined into all parts of the business, and I feel like it's not like I feel like I do feel a responsibility too, but I enjoy, stepping back and looking at what the team or the studio needs to be successful, and jumping in wherever it's needed, learning a new skill. I find that super satisfying. And when you get into a corporate environment, you're right, it's less like that. There are departments that, they usually have scale. So, usually a studio doesn't need a publishing operation because it's already a publishing operation,
Mhm.
or there's integrating those things together. Finance is usually managed centrally, things like that.
Okay, so I guess that kind of leads into wait. So what is the why? So we've asked why. Why do you want to do it? What are good answers for the why? Would you say?
I think there are a lot of good whys. I think some of the folks who I've talked to want to start a studio because they want to make a game, and that is a good and fine reason. But I think it has to come with the understanding that that's not all it's about. Is having a studio is having a business.
It has to make money.
Well, yeah, to survive, it does. Yeah, and to thrive, and if there's a desire to build a business as well as build a game and to make both thrive. And usually you do have to tend the garden that grows the food. You know what I mean? Like the 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 team really is the project. The company really is the project, and that's what makes the creativity happen. If you have that mindset, or you want to have that mindset, or you have a long you want to go into this with a long view, a strategic view.
This is the segue. We're segueing into strategies.
You know what I think is really funny is whenever somebody's interviewing some entrepreneur who's starting a company, like Silicon Valley's tech bro entrepreneur, and they're like, "Why are you doing this?" Their answer is always like, "I want to change the world," or I have. Yeah, like they always have some altruistic answer to it, which I think is kind of bullshit. I think most people who get into entrepreneurship and want to start a business are doing it because they think that there could be a better lifestyle, a better financial reward. There's a lot of personal motivation for doing it. The folks that are altruistic and want to change the world usually go into fields that are altruistic. Business is not that. So, anyways, quick aside. But yes, so I think this is what you were getting at. Like if you're all in, you're going to start a business. It probably makes sense to think about what your long term strategy is to think beyond just making one game.
Okay, so the first one is you have a why, and then the second one would be what's the strategy?
Yeah, I guess the second one is sort of the what. Like why are you going to do this, and what are you going to do? Like, is it interesting? Is there a strategy behind it? And it can be one game. One game as in a product that will could live for a very long time, like a live service. It could be that. But some things that can grow and fuel a game studio are talent, expertise. So expertise in a particular kind of game or a particular technology, technology of itself, and the intellectual property. Like you make a game, an original game. I think the holy grail for starting a game studio is you have the best, most talented team that has built its own technology and created an original IP game that becomes exceptionally successful.
That's very rare, though. That's very rare.
Exceptionally rare. I mean, it is what we ended up doing at Bungie, but that's like a once in a. It's a long shot, and especially today. But those are things to think about. Those relate to like how you start, where you get your money from, what kind of game you're going to make, genre, technology, IP. There are decisions you can make at the beginning that give you opportunities along each of those axes.
There's also something else too, because I think what we're talking about, what you're saying right now is, hey, I want to start a game studio. I'm going to make a game. And there's also studios that are like work for hire. Like that's what Tim was mentioning, right? Like he thought he was just going to make his game, but he ended up just making games for like publishers.
That's right. It's a very good point. Like there's nothing wrong with doing work for hire projects. It's a great way to get revenue in the door. At our studio, we are doing projects with partners for that very reason, because it is a great way to help fund the growth of a team and recruiting and all that. But that's all you're doing.
You're getting hired to do stuff.
All you're getting out of that is that revenue, which in the context of a game studio, which has to pay employees every month, that revenue disappears fairly quickly. So there's no enduring long-term value there. So that's what I mean by like strategy is like, how do you make your company better month over month, year over year by the work that you're doing? Work for hire will make you better because you will get experience. And if you're doing good work and you have good partners, hopefully what you're producing is good. I think that's a trap that Tim fell into at Savage, was that they were just going project to project and weren't really moving the needle, and eventually it caught up with them.
Yeah, I've worked for studios that do that. We're both two kinds actually, where there's studios that start out as like art houses, but they're trying to do their own thing, you know, on the side. And we've worked with studios like that. We just recently did. I've actually met you through a studio like that. As
With that
at an art.
animation farm when you were
Yeah. Yeah.
down in
I was
Austin.
contracting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
There are good examples of that working really well. Like our buddy Max over at Certain Infinity, he spun out a Bungie and he started by doing maps for Halo. So he had a really good partner working
or
on
tools and things like that. Right?
high profile games, and he leveraged that into working on Call of Duty and working on more Halo and other stuff. And he's been able to grow that team very successfully. So there's definitely examples of that working, and he's got I think the way he's made his studio better is they've got a really good expertise in multiplayer and FPS, which is in high demand.
It sounds like, okay, you figure out why you want to do it. Then you have a strategy, a plan, and you could enter that way in that creation of the studio from many different like angles. You could focus on making one game. You have work for hire. You have like a service, like maps, tools, even like an art house or something. So there's different avenues to create a game studio or a strategy, to have a strategy to get funding, to have money, to have revenue, to have.
I think there's two different things, right? There's a strategy to get started, and then there's a strategy for. I think the way that makes sense to think about a long-term strategy is how is your company getting better month over month, year over year? Are you building property that you own? Have you created technology that's unique? Have you built a team that is better today than it was yesterday? All of those things, and you can accrue that strategic value over time by doing lots of different things. Original games, work for hire can contribute to it. Some things are more powerful than others. If you own stuff, that's more powerful. You own a hit IP is the most powerful, probably.
So then that's a good segue into getting it off the ground. So funding.
I would say the good news is that the game industry is more mature and more sophisticated today, certainly, than it was back even 5 years ago. So that means that there are more opportunities to finance a video game operation. So the primary ways that studios get funded are through an interested party. An interested party is like a publisher. So this was pretty much the standard model, back in the day. You make a demo or a pitch, and you go and talk to publishers who are in the business. They're in the business of financing. They take that production risk. They finance the game, but then they also take most of the revenue, right? So that's one way to get a studio started is if you have a compelling game pitch or demo that you can sell to a publisher for funding. Another way of getting started is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is kind of like, okay, we've got a group of founders and we have some other means of support, and we are going to invest our time. And that's sort of the funding is like, if there's 5 of us and we each could be making $200,000 a year, I don't know, whatever it is, that's real funding. That's real money, So if you're doing that and investing that into your studio, that's how you got to fund it. That was bootstrap.
Bootstrapping could also be some students that are still in college. They're working at night and they're trying to make a game and they're going to put it in the app store. Like all of that is pretty much free in a way. That's kind of what you mean too, right?
Yes.
So not in an actual location, like working from home. It's basement, garage band.
Usually the domain of the young. The industry has kind of cycled around like how possible that is, because in the old days you can make a game in a few months. And so, a few months of investing my time in this is let's try it. And then things got more expensive, and you got, console games, forget about it. And even getting a PC game off the ground was just, it was expensive, definitely way more expensive. And we've kind of come back around full circle today where all the tools are free. There are platforms you can distribute on
for free
without spending a dime, and you can make a game in a couple months. And there's a ton of bootstrapping going on right now. So it's very exciting to see that. I think it's going to open up just a lot of accessibility to games and distributing games, and we're just going to see cool stuff for sure. The third method of getting a studio funded right now, which is kind of new, and actually, Mitch Lasky, who we had on the podcast, on his podcast, Gamecraft, he did a whole episode about this funding topic. I recommend you listen to it if you want to get a deep dive. Is raising venture financing. And venture financing is different from publisher financing, the interested party, because the interested party is going to give you money basically in advance on what the game is made. So they don't own your company. They're basically just giving you money to make a game in exchange for the lion's share of the revenue. But if you take venture financing, if you raise money by selling a part of your company, you now have a business partner. Usually they're not really involved in running your business, but you now have somebody who owns part of your company. So you're kind of tied to that investor forever. There are different reasons to do that, and that capital is, we went through kind of a season during COVID where that capital flowed very freely. Like the cost to investors to invest money, like interest rates were very low. So, investors are very eager to put their money into places that would have higher returns than
what year was this?
What they could get. This was like a 2020, 2019, 2020. There's just a lot of activity in the game industry, and there's just a lot of venture financing going into the game industry. So there's a lot of studios that got started in that time frame that raised a lot of money by selling equity in their company. And it's still a very significant way for new studios to get funded. The burden or whatever, the effort you need to put in to get that kind of funding is, I would say the bar is higher, and it's a little different. You sort of really do have to think about that long-term strategy.
Yeah.
Because venture investors are kind of less interested in investing in this one great game idea and more interested in investing in that the
gold mine,
the golden goose.
Yeah.
Great. We like the eggs, but it's really the goose. That we want to invest in.
Can I say something about that? It feels to me like that is the pro way to do it. Just from all the people we've spoken to and just watching, it feels like it's very like there is a pro, like you kind of said it right now, like the way you explained it feels very like you gotta really have everything in check. You have to do a lot of really professional things. So when you present yourself, they're not like, yeah, this guy's a joke,
So when you say pro, you mean the folks that are pursuing this way of getting their studio funded, you usually are what, like just more polished, have a better plan,
or thinking about it in a different way, like more of a very long term.
I think it'd be interesting to talk about a little bit, like why you would choose one of those over another.
Well, what's that? What's left? We had, that's 3. Is there like another one?
I think those are kind of the primary ways that folks get their games or studios funded is, either you bootstrap it yourself, you get money from an interested party like a publisher, or you get venture financing. There are other interested parties out there, like with blockchain, but that's really when a blockchain company is funding a game, they're kind of taking the role of a publisher where they're an interested party. They want
like Kickstarter. What would Kickstarter be?
Oh, that's actually good call, right? I think that's a fourth way. That's crowdfunding.
Yeah,
it's a little bit like bootstrapping.
Yeah, because you don't get that much from that, right?
Well, I mean, you get what you get. If you're Chris Roberts and starts
he's got millions,
you get it all.
What did he get? Like 60 million or what was it? It was millions, right?
Oh, put another zero on there, friend. I think he's up to $500 million raised.
Golly, that's insane.
Through crowdfunding and the advanced sale of assets in that game. It does show the game is beautiful. But yes, crowdfunding is another way.
And then mixing it too, right? Like mixing these. Like I think Tim was saying that
mix and match. Yes, Tim raised venture funding, and they did a Kickstarter to help pay for a collector's edition, which I think is super smart.
And they're going to do the other thing too to get more money.
They're going to do some publishing deals in Asia and Europe. Yes, you're right.
But the Steam thing, the early access is also going to bring in revenue, I think. Right?
Early access is kind of like pre-sales. I guess crowdfunding usually is like pre-sales. It's like getting pre-orders.
Okay.
Which is pretty similar to bootstrapping. But if you look at those three things, like bootstrapping is great because you don't give up anything. If you can do things on your own dime, it's sort of the best of everything, with the exception of how much capital you have at your disposal. But you don't give up any control over what you're building, and you don't give up any equity in your company, in your studio. The downside is, you're going to eat ramen.
There's some good ramen.
It's going to be hard to recruit more people when you need it. It's hard to be predictive on how long things are going to take, but it's got those upsides. Getting money from a publisher is pretty great because you don't give up any equity. If you're successful, you still own what you have, but often it's hard to keep control over things. It's hard to keep control of your IP if a publisher is going to give you enough money to publish your game. Usually, they are going to acquire or have the rights to your intellectual property, which in the long run if it's successful, it's a big deal. The way to get publisher funding is to put together something compelling to show that the game is a game the market wants, and you as a creator or your team is a team that can deliver that game at a high expectation. That's sort of the burden to get publisher funding. And then you have to find a publisher that serves the market you're building the game for and has money to spend. So that's kind of a challenge right now, because a lot of the big publishers that fund things are kind of scaling back a little bit.
Really?
Yeah. So upside, you keep the equity in your company. Downside, you're usually giving up the IP rights to your game. Not always, but usually. And you're giving up the lion's share of the revenue in exchange for the publishing advance. And then if you go to the route of venture financing, there's a real upside there because you have creative control over your game. Usually, kind of aligned. If you have a long-term view for your business, you're kind of aligned with your investor, because that's what everybody wants. I think depends on who you are, but the investor wants you to make this company super valuable and sell it, because that's the investor's business. It's like, I'm not giving you this money because I want to play your game. I'm not giving you this money because I am going to make money off your game. They're giving you money because they want this company to get sold or go public, period. So if that's your ambition, if you're starting a company, starting a studio, because you got a game idea, you got 10 game ideas, you got an idea for building a studio, and you're going to sell it and get rich. I know that sounds crappy, but if that's your MO, then go talk to some VCs, because it's their MO too. If you want to make a game and get it in front of all the people that play this other game you love, you might want to, just from a culture fit perspective, you might want to talk to a publisher that's in that market. The other thing I will say is that as you go up that scale, things become more durable. So if you bootstrap your studio, you still can do anything you want because you haven't given up any rights. If you have a publishing deal, your next game, you can get a different publisher. You still have a good amount of control over your company. If you go the VC route, you do end up with a partner that you're going to have for a long time, and they're probably going to be on your board of directors, and they're probably going to make you vest your ownership over your own company, which means, if this doesn't usually happen, but if things don't go well, it's just more challenging as for you as somebody who's running a studio. So there's that escalation. Usually there's more money involved as you go up that tree, and there's less control.
Now, everything you just said, everything, fantastic, by the way, very good nuggets. But I wouldn't even know where to start with a lot of that stuff. So if it's like for you, you're like, oh, okay, we're going to start a company, and you already know these are the documents we're going to need. They're going to need to sign this. And even depending on if it's a publisher, bootstrap, or whatever, let's say it is bootstrap. You're a bunch of friends and there is an IP. Like, you should probably discuss who's going to own the IP, right? Like, or how that IP is distributed amongst all of you. Or if you're working with a publisher. And I guess that's like the next thing. It's like, okay, so we're going to get funding. What kind of like...
Yes, the operational stuff, the nuts and bolts, which is very important. It's not a sexy topic. They're very important, and some things you do need to take care of at the beginning. And if you forget to take care of, can cause you like real headaches later. So there are legal things like, okay, you need to have an entity. If it's just yourself, that's one thing. But as soon as there's other people, that's at least a partnership. And almost always you want to have some sort of entity that protects you from a liability standpoint. And that's either like an LLC or a corporation. Forming those things has become very easy now because there's lots of places like LegalZoom. They're not a sponsor, but if you'd like to sponsor, you should reach out.
LegalZoom for your documents.
Or places like that where you can kind of set up an entity that will give you liability protection. And what that means is if your business does something that somebody sues you for, having an LLC or a corporation, it's funny, the word corporation, corporal, it's like a person. It's like, this is a concept that is like your business is an actual entity, and it's a disgruntled person can sue that business, and not necessarily ruin your personal life. It's not a magic shield, but it's protection. So you usually need to form some sort of entity. I'll tell you, the only one little bit that I learned the hard way is if you're going to raise venture financing, you want to be a corporation, because VCs don't, invest in LLCs and S corps. They invest in C corps. So if that's the route you're going, save yourself some headache and just register it as a corporation. Probably the most important thing to get figured out is exactly what you were saying, Aaron, is like if you have partners, and I do recommend that, because having a company is like the loneliest thing you could do. Having partners is just good for your health, mental health. If you have partners, you need an agreement. You need an operating agreement or a partnership agreement or something that basically lays out, this is the company, here's who owns what, here's what ownership means. There's lots of different ways that could be written. Like, what if somebody leaves? What if somebody leaves now versus leaves later? What happens to their ownership of the company? Those are all things that it's easy to like kick the can down the road. We're just going to try this out. But it can get complicated if it's not figured out at the beginning. So in addition to sort of having a legal entity that your studio is based on, having that agreement between the founders and putting it down on paper and everybody signing it is critical. That has to be done.
How do you recommend, but whenever you have that, how do you recommend getting that going, right? Because I think what you're saying, I think, is pretty obvious to you because you've done it many times.
And I've made mistakes on all of those things too. So
what would you say? Yeah, but you also started when there was no LegalZoom. It was like, you'd go to the lawyer Larry that was like down the street, and he had a little practice. So what do you recommend people do? Because like what you just said, if I were to do it tomorrow, I would need someone that because I've read contracts and they don't make sense, man.
Get a mentor. Get a mentor.
Get a mentor.
Or
Okay.
talk to somebody who has had a business. Doesn't have to be a video game business, but who has had a business, because when I was, started Bungie when I was like 21. I didn't know anything. You were asking like, or saying, I know. I didn't know. I didn't understand. Didn't know anything. And a lot of things we learned the hard way. But at a family friend who had a successful business, and just asking questions. That there wasn't LegalZoom, but there was. I forget. I think it was called the Company Corporation. I think that's actually what it was called. That would help companies get set up. And it's like, doing that. You don't want to be a lawyer. It's like,
Yeah.
You're making video games. You don't want to be a lawyer. It's a necessary part of the deal. So find somebody, friend, family member, somebody from the school, wherever you are, who can at least point you to somebody who can kind of help guide some of those things. The other thing I would say is like, making a game studio is a superset of making a game. You may know what the roles are for making a game, but you need to also consider what the roles are for making a studio. So in addition to having programmers and artists and designers, somebody needs to do the stuff, the operations stuff, the legal stuff, the accounting.
HR
there's like kind of two bits of that. One is probably the most important fundamental job of an entrepreneur, and the other sort of the technical elements of HR, which are important, but are, you can get help with, there's lots of payroll services that can make sure that employees get their W-4s filled out and that you're withholding taxes correctly and all that. Again, nuts and bolts, very important. Probably something you shouldn't have to figure out on yourself. Go find ADP or some service like that to do it. But the soft skills, the soft part of HR, this is we had Christian Sergestrala on, and he talked about how his primary job at his company is designing the operating system of the business, the culture, the way we relate to each other, the things that we consider sacred. What are our unspoken rules? Like how do we hold each other accountable? How are we build trust and responsible to our mission? What is our mission? I'm not a huge fan of mission statements, but having a big part of managing teams is about agreeing on where we're going, and then making everybody believe we can get there. Because often where we're going is someplace we've never been before, and none of us have traveled the road yet.
That's not HR though, right? That's CEO, would you say?
I guess. I think it's related. I think
it's necessary to have someone, right? Like even if you're bootstrap, like, and you get into a big fight with each other, like there needs to be, I don't know. It feels like there's so many things that like I take for granted, like just everything we've talked about.
It's not a bad point. I mean, when you have a studio, nobody else is going to do any of this stuff for you. There are a lot of things to do making a game and making a studio, and somebody is going to have to do those things, and the buck is going to stop with whoever was in charge. And it's why it's good to not just figure out that partnership agreement about who owns what and what happens in all these situations, but also who's going to do what, because all this operational nuts and bolts is a job.
And who does that? The CEO? Because we're segueing into like team roles now. Like,
yeah, right, I mean, it kind of depends on the skills of those around the table, and how many people there are. Sometimes those roles get split up. In Industrial Toys, when we started, Tim and I played a kind of a game of Rochambeau for some of these things, and he ended up with some of them, I ended up with some of them. And in our studio now, oh my gosh, I am so Patrick, Moran, I'm so thankful for you. Who makes everything work. But somebody's got to do that kind of stuff, and that's kind of the role. That role is an operator,
I think you have to know how to do it. It's a skill. It's not like
It is, yeah, it is absolutely a skill. And some people like doing it. Some people don't like doing it.
There's deadlines too. Like you can't just like wing it. Like you,
Yeah, if the insurance bill doesn't get, I mean, this happened once to me, back in the old Bungie days. We used to pay the bills by writing a physical check and mailing them, got lost in the mail on our insurance. They kind of canceled our insurance. And can you imagine how stressful that is when you get a call from an employee? It's like, my insurance card doesn't work. And you call the insurance company and they're like, oh, you didn't pay your bill. And you're like, oh my God, the fucking world's on fire. Everybody's going to come and kill me. But that's a reality of having a studio, things like that.
yeah. So, okay. So I kind of feel like this point should have been at the beginning, the team part, only because that's how I think about it.
Well, that is kind of like the most important part, but I think intentionally I thought it would make sense to talk about all the other parts because the making the game is not exactly the same, but it's got a lot of similarities no matter where you're making a game.
Mhm.
If you're at if you work for Microsoft and you're on a game team making a game, or you're at an independent studio, your own studio with a game team making a game, there are a lot of similarities there. But all the operational stuff, all of the things to consider about the financing of it, about the relationships you have with your interested parties and all that doesn't exist unless it's your own studio.
Okay.
But yes, let's talk about the team, the magic.
This is a big one, I think, right? It's you said you sprinkled in a few comments earlier that, I mean, they're all big. All the topics are big, but this one, to me, feels like you kind of hinted at some stuff like the HR, like you mentioned some people that help out and take roles. And I guess the question is, you also said like people are going to leave early or late. Like, because when you start, there, I have this idea that you get everyone to agree. Cause like if you're doing this in college, right, with friends, no one's really committed, right? It's kind of like, well, I'm going to move back to my home and like across the country. And now we have internet, so it's a little bit easier to work together, but they're not really like there. They're not committed, maybe. So I'm assuming that when you get the team going, like, how do you get everyone to just agree? Like, all right, we're all going to do this, right? Is the CEO like who, like, do you like, what I'm saying? Like the person that's going to be the CEO, like even when we started this one, the roles and how we were like defining roles, like that's a typical, that could be I'm assuming that could be hard with some people and easier with others.
Oh, for sure. I mean, maybe that's a part that we didn't really talk about yet, but figuring out contracts and things like that's easy in comparison to building a team of individuals who have personalities, and there's a culture that emerges from that, and you want everybody to be motivated and to get along and trust each other. That's hard. That's leadership. It's kind of like, there's a couple parts to it. It's like what I was saying before, is getting everybody pointed in the same direction. Hey, we got together because we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And does everybody agree that this is actually what we're going to do? How well is that articulated? How well is everybody bought into it? How excited is everybody about it? How much ownership and interest does everybody have in going where you want us to go, and the role I get to play in getting there, and the reward I'm going to get when we achieve it? Those are all really important things to think about at the beginning. And it makes a big difference, like who you're doing it with too,
Let's say we start another company and I'm starting it. Doing this podcast has really motivated me to start my own game company. And I want to start doing it, and I'm doing it, but I don't want to do everything you just said. I want it because I'm sure there's people listening to this now that are not the CEO. They're the lead programmer and they want to start a game company. right?
Mm,
You see what I'm saying? Or
yeah.
they're the art
Yes.
director. That's where the team building. I assume it can be like, okay, you're the CEO, you're the
Well, not everybody has the same style, and I think the way I'm describing forming a team is my style. Um, there's other ways to do it for sure.
What's that guy from Marvel with the eye patch? Samuel L. Jackson.
Nick Fury.
You're not Nick Fury. You're Wolverine, but you want to start the X-Men. You need your Professor Xavier, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. There are folks who are just so driven. I think this about Steve Jobs and Elon Musk to do a thing and do a thing a certain way that it's just cult of personality, and there's a lot of people who will follow that because they really buy into the vision. Some people won't, but a lot of people will, and that's also very powerful. There's different ways to manage and motivate a team. But I mean, think about who if you're going to start a studio again, like you're not going to probably not doing it alone. And I wouldn't recommend doing it alone, and think about who you're doing it with. And just depending on how well everybody knows each other, usually people that start a thing together, team together, know each other, have some history with each other. That's a huge advantage because there's
Yeah.
already an element of trust. But you're right. People don't. It's like any relationship. You go into it thinking it's going to last forever, but it doesn't always.
It change. Don't people change? Like right after, like what? Okay, we're gonna start a company, and then the serious things start happening, and you know what I mean? And like people start to like,
Yeah, here's a couple other little bits that really matter. It's like no matter how well you plan, things will not go to plan, especially making a video game, which is very difficult to do. So your best intentions will often go sideways in terms of how long things will going to take, or how uh, how much money things are going to cost, things like that. Um, so often you're going to need a fair amount of flexibility, and you're going to need to, if you're managing a team or you have partners, you're going to have to think a little bit about what happens in various different scenarios and outcomes. The other thing I would say, and this is definitely something that I've learned the hard way, is because things don't go as planned, try to do the important things first. VCs, I think, Silicon Valley people have this phrase "fail fast," and I'm not a fan of the phrase because I don't like the direction of go fail. But I think the intention behind it is right. Is get to an answer quickly. Get to iteration quickly. Figure out the important stuff as quick as you can. Because if you try to build the whole battleship, it's unlikely your first boat's going to float. So get the crappy dinghy out of the way and let it sink, and then
yeah,
get to bigger and better. I think that is good advice.
yeah. So let's say people are going to listen to this, and the people that listen this far are probably really interested in either the topic or have considered it, or maybe now they're motivated. And what would you say to them? Like you can only say one thing to them.
I would say if you want to make a game, think about it. If you want to start a studio, do it. The difference there is what we've just been talking about. It's a difference between making a game or making a business. Being persistent and just figuring out a way to survive is, I know it sounds super basic, but things don't ever go as planned. I should say again, just not just on the game side, but on the business side as well. Like, we had distributors that went out of business, owing us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when that kind of money vaporizes off your cash flow, it's like, you got to think, how do I make this shit work? And having a studio is a lot of that. And so there's a bit of survival planning that's really important to do along the way. You're going to make a game. If you got your money from a publisher, you're going to be done with that game, and there could be more money from that publisher for a while. Your team is probably bigger than it's ever been at that point. You got to think about how you're going to transition. So all those things are important to think about at some point, maybe not necessarily on day one, but as you sort of start charting that path, important to think about the long term.
And for people that are like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm going to do it. Darn it, I'm doing it today, So to those people, how would you guide them with regards to the studio's location? Like work from home, hybrid, or an actual location, like a studio, like a building with rent and,
I think it really depends on the people involved. I feel okay running our studio remotely because we've known each other for 20 years. All of us, and we've worked together. And I trust you all. And that's not something that comes for free. That takes time. Building a team from scratch or with folks that maybe you don't have as much experience with, having presence can really be helpful. It's more expensive though. I mean, I got to say, it's nice not having the overhead of a physical location, and it's nice having the time of that commute back. So I would say pick one or the other. I never really thought about it, but I kind of agree with Susan Cummings' POV that probably should go one way or the other. Hybrid does seem like it creates a couple different classes of employee. And whether you're in person or remote, take some time to spend time together, apart from just like we're working on a game, but spend some time together to get to know each other.
I guess the only question I have left, how big should the first game be?
As small as possible.
Small as possible.
As small as possible. I think there's probably a question to ask before that one, which is, what kind of game should we be making? Like, what is the mission of our studio? Like, why are we doing? Because if it's like, hey, we're going to make puzzle games, the answer is very different than we're making an MMO. But I think that's the last question, probably out of scope for this conversation today. Might be a good, interesting conversation for tomorrow, which is, where are the opportunities to start a game studio today?
All right. Do you think people could start a studio now with this? I think so. There's a lot here.
Let us know if that was motivating or terrifying. I don't know, one or the other, maybe some of each. I have started a few studios, and I've bootstrapped studios. I've done publishing deals, and I've done venture financing.
You've mentored too, right?
Yes, I'm on a lot of advisory boards. I've done some angel investing in studios. There's the business of video games is fascinating to me because it is always changing, and I've never stopped learning. And I think that's why I'm still doing this. If you asked me even just 18 months ago, if you asked me if I would be doing today what we are doing today, I would be like, that's not a thing. And I also think it's just bonkers. It's just bonkers where the industry is. In some ways, it's bonkers bad, but in a lot of ways, it's bonkers great.
I think it's bonkers great. Yeah. And it's crazy. There's like even educational stuff now and like medical stuff. There's like games as medicine, like that's a crazy con. There's money there, there's UGC. There's so many things.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
Tune in next week. We're going to be airing...
Oh, it's so good.
...our special episode about GDC called The Conference. It features Aaron's part of it. Our good friend Patrick Curry's part of it. We get a chance to hang out with Geometric Interactive, who made the amazing game Cocoon. And I got to meet Chris Crawford, who I've never met before. He started GDC. One of the more fascinating folks. He says he's not in the game industry anymore, but tune in to listen to his story and all the others. We're very excited to share that episode, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Fourth Curtain Podcast. The Fourth Curtain is a production of Fourth Curtain Media with community management by Doug Zartman. Lovingly edited and mastered by Brian Hensley at Noise Floor Sound Solutions in Chicago. To get a peek at upcoming episodes or to send in questions to the show, visit our site at thefourthcurtain.com. And be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.